they posted a picture of their new copy of Unicorn Overlord on PS5, right? And this guy says, I started today. It's a great game so far. Reminds me of your ogre battle games. I wish we could get those ported to modern platforms, but I'm happy to have this, right? And sort of like tweets at him or whatever. And the first thing he says is, you should discard memories of past games. Like, like you could look at that from the Western lens and be like, wow, like that's really brash and rude. But I think what he's trying to say is exactly this concept of mono no aware that is so inherent in their culture. They just understand that feeling.
Sure.
Truly, the romance of impermanence is most often expressed and found in things that are cyclical. One could even argue, if we are to be properly philosophical here for a moment, that the very idea of mono no aware cannot be disentangled from the view that all the things which pass return again at some point. And on that note, the fact of the matter is that no one cherry blossom petal or returning season is exactly the same as the last. The passing of time, irreversible, and past events accurately untraceable. And it is because of this, the present moment becomes truly valuable and beautiful. Moreover, it is precisely for this reason that the Japanese return again and again to watch the cherry blossoms in spring. The beauty of permanent loss draws them, like moths to a flame, to re-experience, even as doing so in truth is impossible. And even though the nature of it is such that its emotional fruits can never be enjoyed without giving something up in return. Put differently, mono no aware stands in the twilight between gain and loss, one always predicated upon the other, and only those who can accept the burden of the sacrifices entailed by such a relationship may reap the benefits of life's beauty without being crippled by the fatigue of its burdens. Not only is this the substance of the idea of mono no aware, the guiding star of its aesthetics expressed in the arts, but it's also something I believe most people learn naturally when they come face to face with the vicissitudes of life over the years. Moreover, might I postulate that while it is healthy to honor the past through remembrance and normal to reminisce, we do so best by also celebrating the way in which the withered plants of prior years feed the ones of those to come. Those are the words of my friend Stefan, also known as Hian, in our Discord server and other places online, in an excellent essay that I am going to be putting a link to in the description for those of you who are interested in reading the whole thing. It's really good. But Hian is my guest for today's episode. And this topic is one that I have been wanting to cover for quite a while, but I just haven't really found kind of the right place or time. So, Hian, do you want to really quick just kind of talk about what mono no aware means, how you came across this philosophy, and what it has meant to you, and how it prompted this essay that you wrote?
Sure. So, mono no aware is a Japanese aesthetic principle that you could say originated in the Heian period, though it wasn't really sort of publicly discussed, I think, a lot until the 18th century by some Japanese scholars. It's a bit difficult to capture in words, and that's something that if you read up on it, you will notice as well that some of the proponents and scholars of this in Japan sort of refuse to give a general definition of it because they believe that it's something that you actually have to feel. It's an emotional thing. It's something that you understand emotionally more so than intellectually. On the surface is this sort of wistful sort of appreciation of how things come to pass and die and disappear and so forth. But if you were to, for example, conceptualize this with, as I did in the essay, and which is very common, by the way, sort of by referencing the sakura, the Japanese cherry blossom, the season is very short, and the petals sort of fall to the ground and as plants do, they wilt. And
Isn't it like only like a week or maybe 2 weeks?
yeah, something like that. It's very short. And of course, the tree itself, when you see sort of the sakura tree, the cherry blossom tree, without any of its petals on it, it's very stark. It's a bit blackish, and the angles of the branches are very sharp, and it looks kind of dead, really. So you have sort of that juxtaposition, the fact that the moment is so fleeting, and you have to show up, and you appreciate it with your eyes, and you look at it, it's very beautiful, and then it just passes and it's gone. And there's a sense with which that mentality, of course, is a very large part of Japanese culture itself and history, in terms of how they thought about nature and death. And you can think about it in so many ways, and I could probably talk about it for hours. But for example, Japan is a country with a very turbulent nature. You have a lot of earthquakes, you have tsunamis, and so forth. So and you have the Warring States period where life was very cheap. For example, in Japan, you had, and you don't hear a lot of people talk about this, you had a social caste known as the eta. And the eta are people who would work with tanning hides, cleaning up corpses, and whatever. So they were basically the lowest of the low. And they were so low on the totem pole that just being seen by a samurai incurred the death penalty. Any samurai could cut down and kill it just for seeing them, because they were unclean. And that social caste is so unclean that even the stigma of those people who carry family names that you could tell were from that caste, carried with it sort of social repercussions for a very long time in Japan, even as they sort of came into the modern age. So you think of this country that it has turbulent nature and death everywhere in many ways, and sort of the fleeting nature of life and the quickness with which death comes, probably in a way, I suppose, inspired this type of mentality, this type of appreciation of the moment. Life is so fleeting and so short and so full of misery. And of course, you have Buddhism on top of that, and you have Shinto as well, which there are overlapping ideals here. And even in Japanese aesthetics, we're talking now about mono no aware, but if you look it up, you will find other concepts like wabi-sabi, shibumi, and miyabi, and stuff like that. And no matter which one of them you look at, there are some like similarities. There's some strands of DNA that go through all of them, sort of the fleeting nature of life, the impermanence of it, and finding ways of appreciating, I suppose, your existence in the moment relative to those facts of life. And those are then sort of, I suppose, that serves as a kind of spiritual influence or inspiration for various features of Japanese art, which some are more apparent than others. But even though I wouldn't say that Final Fantasy VI is like a mono no aware work, or Final Fantasy X is like a mono no aware work, you kind of you feel the spirit of it simmering underneath, because there's a very similar thing, like when Yuna dances on the waves and sort of sends the spirits away and stuff like that, where there's this sadness, this melancholy to it almost. But at the same time, it's really beautiful, and it is beautiful precisely because of that melancholy. And it's kind of, again, I don't know if it's reasonable to sort of try to do this in a Anglo-Saxon English way, where here's my neat and tidy definition of what it is. It's something that you feel even as you're in Japan. You look at the small things, whether you're in Kyoto and you're looking at the architecture there, or you're watching a movie by Takeshi Kitano, and he has these kind of lingering slow shots of that capture this very again melancholic kind of sense that here you have this precious moment, and we're lingering on it precisely because now it's gone, right? It was there, you lingered on it, and now it's gone, it's not coming back. And you have a lot of the Japanese stories where you have these sort of irreversible moments of beauty. I don't think even most Japanese artists necessarily think of themselves consciously doing this. it's just so imbued in the culture as a whole that I think it's very hard to grow up in Japan and being exposed to Japanese works without that leaving such a mark that when a Japanese animator or whatever sits down to draw something, that it doesn't almost uh, automatically start veering off in that direction.
Literally, what just screams at me or pops in my head right away as you describe that is the fact that I could not find the words to describe Terranigma, when I did my retrospective on that a couple years ago. And even when I was trying to describe my feelings on it in a recent episode we did on our top 10 favorite games, when I'm talking about, let's say, Xenogears or something like that, for example, right? There's just a trove of academic topics you could dive into to sort of explain, what it's getting at and what it's trying to say. And that's because it was driven, it was inspired by a lot of sort of academic sources. I feel like Terranigma, first of all, I'm assuming you've played Terranigma, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So Terranigma, to me, where you find all of its meaning are in these just almost fleeting moments of nature and beauty in the game, kind of combined with the musical flares and things like that. And I just literally cannot describe how those moments made me feel. There's a sunrise and some animals on the plains and things like that, or just these moments, or even at the end of the game as the credits are rolling and you have this gull that's kind of flying through the world and things like that. Not going to spoil the ending of that game because I think it's absolutely beautiful. But that's the kind of game that embodies the concept I think you're talking about in more ways than one. One, I think the Mana no Aware is very, very prevalent there. But at the same time, just this idea that what I'm trying to express about how this game moved me is not something that language is really very sufficient to use as a tool to do that. It's an emotion, and that emotion, it can't really be put into words very well.
No, I agree. I think obviously this I think goes for any topic of emotions in general. I can explain to you what it's like to be angry or love someone or be sad, but I don't think that if you were to encounter a person that has never been sad before in their life, imagine what the process of trying to explain that emotion to them would look like. And do we really believe that they actually understand it? Even if, so when I'm sad, I feel this thing in my stomach and in my chest, and this person has never been sad before, and they're listening to those words. I don't know that they would truly understand it. And I think Mono no Aware is kind of like that. There's a little bit of maturity, emotional maturity that has to happen for a person to really understand what it is. It really harkens back to a lot of things in life. I used to do mixed martial arts in Japan for a period of time. And shout out to everybody at Paraestra, by the way. Doubt anyone's looking, but my one of my teachers there, one of the instructors there, was terrible at explaining things with words. He had no I don't know, conceptual understanding of what he was doing at all. He was just really good at fighting. And if you couldn't make something work, he would just say, "Well, if you keep on doing it, you'll understand it eventually." But because he believed that things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and so forth, those are things that you really have to learn them with your body and remember them with your body. It's like swimming. You don't learn swimming by standing at the poolside and going.
Yes, right.
If somebody pushes you, you're still if somebody pushes you, and you're still going to drown and die, right? If you don't. And so it's kind of like that. And I think life in general, when it comes to emotionally deep things that are emotionally deep and resonant, those are things that you have to live in order to really understand them. It's like human relationships, and this is kind of one of those things where there's a sort of, obviously when we're talking about art, we're talking about emotions and ideas that are expressed through visual symbolism, audio, and through text and so forth, narrative. And so those are supposed to be sort of highways to that like emotion, um, ways of transporting you into that mindset or into that feeling. I think it's interesting too. Now we have sort of Sakuyuchi's Fantasian on the horizon, which I know was a game that didn't resonate very well with you, but it's a game that resonated very well with me. And I was kind of replaying the opening parts of that, and I was struck by there are some of these like shorter vignette stories with the text and stuff like that.
Right. Kind of like Lost Odyssey in that way, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those stories I found really resonate with me. And one of the reasons they resonate so strongly with me is because I feel as if when he wrote those, or whoever wrote those, we're getting at some human experiences that I recognize from my own life, and they resonate with a particular kind of. I can kind of tell it is an old dude who wrote this,
Right.
if you get what I mean,
Yeah.
and who had sort of certain experience in high school or whatever, and the words are kind of summoning me into that mindset, feeling those feelings again, and that's why it's resonating, obviously, because of that parallel between what I suppose is the spirit of in which it was written, and sort of my own experiences as a human.
It's almost something that you can't really understand until you're old enough to really come face to face with some real loss in your life, right? Like a 10 or 12-year-old can't really understand the concept of mono no aware the way that somebody older who has, experienced this cycle, as you describe it, of, coming to appreciate, love something, spending time with it, having it be a part of you and your identity in a big way, and then it passing or being lost and having to like mourn that loss, and then come through the mourning of that loss and then understand its sort of beauty in the whole landscape of this experience we call life, right? That's like a lot of steps or a process you have to go through, I think, to really appreciate what this emotion is.
Even as a very small child, I was surrounded, and although I didn't know it at the time, by a lot of Japanese media. And so I think, and I postulate this as a reason for why I grew up to enjoy a lot of Japanese role playing games and Japanese media in general. I think I was kind of stealth indoctrinated as a child, and we can talk about that in a moment. But Mono no Aware as a concept, it wasn't something that I was introduced to until I was in university, because I did cultural studies, right, and I had a focus on Japan. So I was introduced to Mono no Aware through my Japanese literature classes, and I didn't think too much of it at the time, presumably because I was still not, oh, this is just some like literature concept. It wasn't really pertinent um, to my life at that time.
Yeah.
I was 19 or whatever, and when I was 19, I was a real idiot. I was outside, sort of partying and getting drunk and being stupid. Uh, so that really didn't land with me then. But I did move to Japan and live there very long, and so um, I guess slowly it started making sense on an emotional level as I was living there and experiencing things. And then I sort of remembered it, I think, in retrospect, and I was like, oh, so that's what that is. Okay, I get it now. But as I said, I think I was primed for that because again, when I was a child, I had a very strange upbringing. Some could perhaps call it a bit medieval. I lived in, out in the woods. And I was raised on the Greco-Roman and Norse myths and the Arthurian cycle and stuff like that. And I used to be outside and flailing sort of a wooden sword around and shooting bows. And so not a very traditional upbringing by 21st century standards by any means. And one of the things that I came across when I was 12-ish was the Japanese book known as the Hagakure, which is a text that was written by samurai in the 16th century Japan. You have this old samurai who he was forbidden from killing himself in sympathy to his master who had died, and he was consigned to be a Buddhist monk. And a younger samurai would come to him and write down his thoughts. And this book is somewhat prolific. It's been very popular in martial arts circles, and it featured in the movie known as Ghost Dog with Forrest Whitaker, which is an amazing movie. But basically, it's a collection of these sort of small, poignant pearls of wisdom about life from this old samurai. Now you can read that in one way, and you can become kind of cuckoo by it. But the impression that it left on me that I thought was very interesting is that in many ways, when you read what this old samurai said, he is exactly like those old people that you presumably grew up with yourself, who are like, "Oh, the young generation don't know anything, right?" When I was
he was he was a boomer samurai.
he was exactly, he was a boomer samurai, right? And he laments how the new generation are completely hopeless and fragile, and they're all woke and whatever. And he doesn't like the new samurai. They don't understand everything. They don't just kill people for no reason, right? That's what's up with that. And it's very funny when you read it, because when you draw the parallel to all the old people in your life, you're just like, wait, is this a thing that just happens every generation? Just people grow old and they start like hating on the
I am really a believer in that is the case. I mean, that's just literally another cyclical thing of life, right? Like you
exactly.
become the thing that you hated when you were a teenager, almost in every instance.
Sure. So it was very interesting. So I was like 12 when I was exposed to that, but at the same time, that book in and of itself, like the philosophy that this person espouses, is also very mono no aware. I always tell this story because I think it's very interesting. But in Japan, you have the story of the 47 Ronin, who I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a very famous story. They made lots of movies out of it. So you have this warlord that's betrayed and he dies, and his like retainers all become Ronin. And they're going to take revenge, but what they do is that they pretend to be all caught up in debauchery and prostitution and alcoholism and whatever, to sort of put the other warlord at ease, and then they spring like a trap on him and kill him. And this is this romantic samurai tale that everybody loves in Japan, right? So this is these were true samurai, and this guy who's interviewed for the Hagakure is like, this is stupid. These are terrible samurai, because like, what if that warlord had died of like old age or sickness while you were busy sort of doing that thing? Then all you would be remembered as are degenerates, right? You would have failed to take revenge, and society would have remembered you as degenerates. And the only reason this is remembered fondly is because you had good luck. And that is not the way in the samurai. The samurai should not care about that. You should have just marched up to that guy's castle and laid siege to it and tried to kill him. And if you died in the process, well, so fucking be it.
Yeah, right.
And the fact that you could not do that shows that you lack the cojones, right? You lack the balls as a samurai. So he basically spits on this romantic story that's cherished by all the Japanese people. Right?
Love that.
So he's like this insane radical. But so reading that, that mindset, you can even say that mindset is kind of, like a little bit more right? Like, it's not about, this is what you have right now. Like, do something about it, right? And it's so I wouldn't, like, technically, if you called that mono no aware in a university class about mono no aware, the teacher would probably flip out. So don't do that. But I think there's a sense that when you're 12 years old and you're reading that and you're getting all that like weird 16th century samurai mumbo jumbo like into your brain at that age. And I also read my first Mishima novel, Yukio Mishima, when I was 12 as well. So again, I think I was primed to sort of end up where I did when it came to an appreciation of this, because having gotten those sort of that sort of stimuli at an early age, and then arriving in Japan, living there, and going, I had a child there. Of course, I got married. So I went through sort of the seasons of life in Japan, experiencing a lot of those things that I think tie back together with that resonates with that. And so coming back to that, I think I wrote that essay last year or the year before. That was kind of when I started thinking about it again, and some gears started turning in my head. And I obviously, because you've read it already, but I wrote that because I was a bit tired of the conversations pertaining to sort of Square Enix and Final Fantasy and that sort of stuff. So that's like the impetus for writing it. But it was also a way for me to, I guess, uh, do some emotional detox.
Sure. Yeah. And that, I mean, that's super important. Like, I kind of went through the same thing kind of during the same time. And there really is a moment, I feel like, of clarity. And maybe this can take us into like the importance of like applying the concept, because I feel like I'm speaking for myself here, but there are a lot of people who you can kind of really get hung up on this stuff that you were really into as a young person, particularly during this transition that maybe a lot of us are in, where, maybe I'm late stage for this, right? I'm 37 years old, but you're transitioning from your maybe like teenage, adolescent sort of self, the persona of that stage of life, where in my opinion is where you develop almost all of your tastes and like um preferences and like the things that you enjoy and don't. It's where you're coming into your own as a person, right? Your childhood is very, at least for me, very influenced by your parents. So like the music I was into as a 7-year-old is the same music my father was into when he was in high school, right? The stuff that he developed at that stage where you're separating from your parents and becoming your own person. And so during that stage of life, at least for us and a lot of people listening to this, this is where we started encountering JRPGs and like our tastes in video games and movies and, storytelling and all that kind of stuff. So you have like that stage of life where you discover all of that, and it's really exciting, and you form like really amazing memories during this part of your life. And then there's this next step or transition as you move from that adolescent stage into your adulthood, and you don't have the same kind of time that you used to. You have new responsibilities, new people you have to look after, family, job. So you're not able to maybe spend as much time as you once could with this kind of stuff, but at the same time you see it changing, and maybe in ways that you miss, like, but the reason why I liked this in the first place was because of this or that element, and now they're kind of moving off of that, and the trends and the market is changing, so to speak, right? And so you're in this stage where it's like you don't know how you feel about this new stuff, and then we're in this age with video games in particular where they're trying to dredge up or bring back stuff that was popular in the past because there's a market for that. We feel like it's safer to just stick with the property, but we're also adjusting things for like a modern market. And so there are certain things in that transition of a remake or whatever that like, we're going to change this certain gameplay element, or it's going to be over the shoulder now instead of, fixed camera angles or whatever. And so the people who grew up with they have gripes with like how this is done. The point in all of this is you get into this stage of transition where you can get really sort of bogged down or obsessed with holding on to the past. That stuff that you grew up with and loved, and those feelings that you had, and you want to retain that for as long as you can, and you don't want to lose it. And I think it's very human to not want to let go of things that you really loved and cared about from your past. But without doing that, you will impede your own progress as a human being and in your life, and you'll get really hung up. And so that's where this concept really comes into play. It's this recognizing the beauty in the impermanence. You're drawn, like you're saying, to when the cherry blossoms fall every year. Well, we should maybe get into that too, right? The cyclical sort of like element of this, right?
Yeah, I guess that's somewhat of that's I guess a little bit more my personal philosophy as far as it goes, because I don't think Mononawari itself necessarily implies it. Depends on how you look at it, I guess.
Yeah.
Depends on your point of view. But
From a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
but I at least I feel that because when again, like a lot of Japanese professors elect this motif of the cherry blossoms as a sort of in art as a motif of Mono no Aware. And I find that very interesting because, like, yeah, sure, the cherry blossom is impermanent and drops to the ground, but like it comes back again every year. Right. So
yeah, that's the part of this that you know, as I'm reading your so I'm reading your essay and things, it's like, again, it's hard to explain. Like, if you understand the emotion, then you understand it. But like, it's almost like I'm trained as being like a personality on the internet to like look for the contradictions in what I say and be able to respond to them. So it's like, on the one hand, you're positing this idea that, you know, there's a beauty in impermanence and that the cherry blossom is a symbol for this. Yet at the same time, the cherry blossom does come back. People get to re-experience it. It's not impermanent, but the particular petal, or like the fact that each snowflake is not the same, or there's exactly. Still an element of impermanence in all of this. Do you maybe want to go over that?
And yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's kind of the argument that I make in the essay as well, where you know, you can go back and see the cherry blossoms every year, but it's never going to be the same experience every year. You know, you're going to be there with different people. The blossoms are going to land in different spots. You know, maybe it's one year it's a great weather for going there and doing hanami, as they call it, and sit there and sip your sake or your strong zero or whatever, and watch the petals. And then the next year the weather is terrible. You know, one year you go there in high spirits because you found a girlfriend or something, or a boyfriend. The next year you go there in low spirits because you just broke up. And because of that, it is inevitable that even as you try to re-experience things, they are not the same thing. They cannot be the same thing. They will always be different. I replay Final Fantasy VII bi-yearly, right? Almost. It's never the same experience. It's always a little bit different. I notice different things. I linger on different things. I might be annoyed by something that I wasn't annoyed by before, or I might like something that I used to annoy me and I like it more. I've been replaying Final Fantasy IX recently, and it's just because I've been so immersed in a lot of like the development history and the other games for so long. Now I'm seeing all these crazy references that I couldn't see the first time I played it or whatever, and it's just like, so it's different. It's never the same, and so I think that obviously Mono no Aware itself is the appreciation and sort of this melancholy and almost love for the impermanent. Reality itself might be impermanent. We have, you know, the looming threat of the heat death of entropy and so forth. So, yeah. but I kind of conceptualize reality as a spiral, right? It's like a you know, it's spiraling towards the entropy, right? Towards the heat death. But as it spirals, it comes back around again over and over again. So you get these like, and because it's a spiral, the loop is not the same either, right? So a spiral is a very nice sort of visual illustration of this. Where,
yeah, and I mean, like, gravity creates those patterns in the universe, right? It's literally everywhere. It's everything spiraling around each other, returning to the same point.
And so returning to the same point, but it's because it's a spiral, it's still a bit off, right? It's not. It's a little more off every time.
Yes.
So which different. Is what entropy is. So exactly. So you know, it comes back, but it's not the same. And it comes back again, and it's a little bit more different again. And I don't want to talk about this quite yet, but just before I forget, I think that's what's interesting about the conversation when it comes to remakes, because when you think about a remake, you think about, oh, they're doing it again. But then you think about this old saying that there's only like 7 stories or whatever. You know, Star Wars is just kind of Lord of the Rings in space. So couldn't you say that Star Wars is a remake of Lord of the Rings in a way? And you know, and Lord of the Rings is like a remake of all the other monomyths that were done before. But they just swap the names out. It's just that the change is more drastic, obviously, but it still embodies sort of the cyclical nature of that. So just like, you know, the Japanese come every year to watch the cherry blossoms, a person who really likes the monomyths reads, watches Star Wars, and then they come back again to read Wheel of Time, and then they come back again to read Lord of the Rings, and they come back again to read Harry Potter, and
They do it over and
and
over again. Yeah. So that's one thing I'm kind of trying to parse in this is like there's I don't know if it's not a fine line. It's a very undefined line, I would say, between over here where I felt like I was unhealthily obsessed with this conversation about what is the spirit of Final Fantasy and all this stuff we were doing for years on the channel, just drudging up this conversation like over and over again, and then getting to a point where I knew I needed to move past this. I need to let go of this thing that is frustrating me or bothering me, right? But at the same time, I am still a person who thinks that there is value in revisiting old stuff that I've read or seen or played a million times. I will continue to read the Witcher novels over and over again, and Lord of the Rings, and the Neverending Story, and like all this stuff that I grew up with as a kid. Like, and as you state in the essay, there's room, and it is healthy. Like, reminiscence is an important thing, but maybe it's just a matter of balancing it to where you aren't so caught up or stuck in sort of like trying to recapture exactly what you found valuable about that experience in the past, being able to like appreciate it but let it go.
Well, there's the balance to it, but I also think that there's a overarching mindset. Like, I think it's less about balance and more about perspective. I think the way that I conceptualize this, the reason we are so fond of the past in many ways is because I think life is kind of like this. You are here, this is the edge of the cliff, this is where you die, and you're walking towards this. And so looking forwards is terrifying, because looking forwards means that you're gauging how much distance you have left until you die. So instead of walking forward, we walk backwards, because as we get closer to the edge, there's more there, it just extends, right? We have more and more stuff here.
Back the other way, literally walking with our backs to the cliff,
towards
looking
to the
back.
cliff, backwards, right? I think that's like human nature to do that, or at least I don't think all humans do that sort of like pathologically. I just think that there's a part of life that is that. And I think it's so natural to do that I wouldn't fault or blame anyone for doing so. Because again, as you're walking backwards towards the cliff, if you turn back around, suddenly there's only 2 meters left. I'm my life is over. That sucks, and you get depressed. If you spend your life walking forward, then the things to look forward to
diminish.
You run out of them, they diminish. You spend your time looking backwards, walking towards the cliff, then the things that you have to enjoy actually increase. And I think that's why we're so fond of the past. But therein also lies my point about perspective. If the only reason you're looking backwards is because you're afraid of looking towards the cliff, then that is when it becomes unhealthy, because the reason you're clinging on to those things is not because you're, let's just say this, acutely and emotionally sort of in that experience, right? Rather, you're using it as like a blanket of comfort to avoid having to turn back around and look forward again. And I think that if you are capable of you can look back over your shoulder and think about the things in your past that were really good and reflect about those and cherish those memories and take valuable lessons from that you can use as ammunition or as tools as you move forward. I think that's great. But if all you're really doing is turning around because you're terrified of sort of the cliff, then what happens is that you could, on one hand, sit down and replay Final Fantasy VII for the umpteenth time and really, really soak in the experience and be like, I love this. This is so good. And just like or you could be replaying Final Fantasy VII out of this kind of, because you don't want to try anything new. Right? You're just going back to the thing that's sure, right? That it's kind of like going to restaurants too. Do you want to go to like a new restaurant and sample some new food, or I'm just gonna go to the restaurant I always went to and eat the same
Yeah,
thing that I
eat the
always
same
eat.
thing I always
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
so like if you go to that old restaurant that you used to go to, because right now, emotionally speaking, you crave that burger. You want that burger that I had when I was 12. Like I crave that burger. I want to go there and I'm gonna enjoy that juicy burger and it's gonna be the best thing ever. If that's the mindset that you go back and have that burger, then that's great. Like I think that's fine. But if the only reason you're doing it is sort of out of habit or out of I can't be bothered to go and see what's over in the new restaurant, like who are those immigrants with their kebabs or whatever, I'm not going to eat that shit. Like if that's sort of the your mindset, or like, oh, the French, like the frog eaters, I can't be bothered with that. I only if that's sort of the mindset that you're trapped in, then you are literally just this person walking backwards towards the cliff. And so I think that's when it becomes unhealthy. I think that when you go back to the past to re-experience something, it should be out of almost this kind of puerile or juvenile or like almost childish sense of wonder again. That what you have to recapture to really recapture the past is just this sort of pure emotional enjoyment. Right, I'm not going back to this because it's old or because it's the only thing I know or because it's comfortable. I'm going back to it just because it's awesome, right? I think it's awesome. I just want to enjoy it. And there's a level of metacognitions that you probably have to be able to separate those two things. And I agree that that's making shaving off the difference here. What is my actual real emotional motivation for doing this? Having a self-awareness of that is probably not easy. I don't know how many people can really honestly reflect and do that in this very genuine way. Most people will be pulled one way or the other by a lot of subconscious uh, things, I think, going on in their mind at any given moment. So, but it's an ideal, like most things in life. I'm never going to be Super Saiyan, obviously, but I can still work out, right? I can go to the gym and I can work out and like and improve. And it's the same thing here. I might never be able to perfectly and neatly inside of my head stack all my different experiences into different boxes and go, this okay, I can let go of this thing now. I don't have to re-experience that. Like it's not that easy. We're not computers, but it's worth at least, I think, thinking about as you go about your day. Right, like to what extent am I walking backwards towards the cliff and just kind of scoping out my past to avoid sort of the uncomfortable cliff ahead of me or behind me in this case.
Yeah. I've in our conversations, I've always found that you have a gift for analogies and metaphors to make your point. And I think this one just really beautifully illustrates exactly the heart of the issue here. This idea of you're walking towards a cliff. It's almost like, maybe to add to the analogy, you can't stop walking. So like you're compelled to walk. You can't like stop and take a break or sit on a rock on the side. Like your feet are moving whether you like it or not, right? But some people, like you're saying, turn around and walk backwards to focus rather on the things they've already experienced and try to hold on to them, cling to them, and are too scared to look this way, right? I think that's a beautiful, beautiful analogy and puts it in such a perfect way. I feel like I have seen this. Older people, I go to their house and maybe they just have a stacks of VHS tapes or something like that of like, old classic movies like that they grew up with, obviously 1950s, 1960s era movies, and that's like all they watch on TV. And they just can't get into stuff coming out now. It's just, oh, movies are garbage now and this sort of thing, right? There's this attitude about it where I felt like as a teenager, maybe as I saw this, I looked at that and that it's the frustration between the Zoomers and the Boomers, right? Like the Zoomers are like, you're just yelling at clouds and they haven't experienced yet this transition that takes place. I think that maybe we're really beginning to understand at our stage of life, but like there's just this inability that I think I do not want this to happen to me is what I'm trying to say. I do not want to develop the inability to appreciate new amazing things that are coming out because I'm so like hamstrung, like so tied to, so married to, that there's a right way to go about doing this. And it happened when I was 15 and I went and saw Lord of the Rings for the first time. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to be the person who's like, I can never enjoy new, wonderful things that are made, or even like new technologies, right? You run into old people all the time who like, I can't be bothered with these smartphones. Like, I was actually just on like a fishing trip, and like the guy's boat who we were out with, right? He's an older guy, old fisherman guy. And he was talking about how he went in to buy a phone, and he did not want a smartphone. He did not even want texting or the internet or anything. The only thing he wanted was a dial to dial someone's number and talk with them. And the person trying to set him up was like, well, trying to, like pitch the usefulness, like the utility of like these different things that the phone can do. And it's like, well, you don't want texting, or aren't you? And he's like, no, like, why would I do that to someone? Why wouldn't I just call them? There's this mindset that's just locked, totally locked to these very useful tools because, as you're saying, I think he's maybe walking backwards a little. I don't want to presume too much about his life. I don't know this man. But there's a sense there that at least in this aspect, that's what's happening. There's this longing for a time when we used to call each other and we used to have like real connections and things like that, right? And there's maybe even some truth to that sentiment. Like I think it is true that we're in the modern age, at least where I live, we're not as friendly with our neighbors. We don't know the people around us and have connections with them like we used to. But there's a little bit of a sentiment here of like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's like, because of that, I therefore reject any useful new tool or technology or good thing that has come from this sort of like modern age. And what I'm really trying not to do, and what I felt like, at least in one aspect, I was doing a little bit, in kind of obsessively having this conversation over and over and over about, Final Fantasy is different now and it's not as good and all this stuff, was it's not even necessarily about accepting Final Fantasy for what it is. It's about just letting go of what this idea that I thought was important to maintain. Like it's fine that it is what it is now, and it's got a new audience, a new market, and people enjoy it for what it is now. I can be okay with letting it be that, and I can just move on from what I'm like so tied down to over here, and open my time, open my energy for new stuff coming out, instead of living back there, trying to dredge up that, special moment that I had as a teenager, as a child, playing this game for the first time. Is that maybe like a good way of putting it?
Yeah, I think so. Though I would add that in my analogy, I think I'm also thinking of this in terms of just a basic uncomfortability with our own impermanence, with our own mortality, right? Wherein, again, like, if you're walking backwards, the road ahead of you grows longer, right? But if you're facing forward towards the cliff, then the longer you walk, the shorter it gets. In other words, the longer you live, and the longer you live watching forward, the more you actually have to accept that things are disappearing, right? And that the end of your own life is coming closer and closer. The more you walk, the closer you get to the cliff here being when you die. And of course, the more and more stuff disappears as you're walking forward.
So what kind of draw distance would you say that life and memory have? Are we talking N64 level draw distance, or are we?
No, but I think that's the distinction between people, right? So, for example, when you're young, it's very easy to walk forward, right? Because you have so much in front of you, and that, I think, is why young people it's so easy to accept these things, because accepting these things doesn't really present any loss for them. But as you walk further ahead, in other words, as you grow older, it's easier to turn around and focus on the road behind you, which is now growing progressively longer, because the future that you see, you don't see a future anymore, because your future stops with you when you're 80 or 100 or whatever. And so I think that to look ahead is something that, mentally speaking, belies really acknowledging your own impermanence. It means accepting that, well, I'm not going to be around forever, right? And even if they do make new things, I might die before they're done, right? I might not get to play Fantasian because somebody, I could, on the Switch or whatever, because somebody hits me with a car as I head back to my apartment. Um, and but if I just turn around and I just focus on the things that I've already done, or that are already there, then I don't have to think about that. Right? I don't think about my death. I don't have to think about the end. I don't have to think about new things. I can just live in that bubble, that in the garden that I've made for myself, and that keeps expanding, right, as I grow older. So, like, for example, when I was 5, you go back and play a game. What games are you going to be playing? Then you have played 3 games, right? You don't have any games to go back to. But now I'm 37. I've played, I don't know how many games I've played. Played way too many games. I probably have like hundreds upon hundreds of games that I could go back to. So I could probably spend the rest of my life just playing games I've already played and never play another new game ever. I have enough games, so I could live in this kind of static. Like, I could live in stasis just listening to the music that I've already listened to, and not run out of music. But I think that could probably be comfortable, right? I could just, here are all the games that I like. I have 100 games that I like. I have 100 albums that I like. And I can just, and all the books that I have. I can just live in this, sort of little bubble that I've made for myself with the things that I like, and pretend as if the world outside isn't moving, and then
Yeah, exactly.
pass away quietly through the night. But that's the thing, right? So if that sounds terrible, like not a way to live, then you're going to have to turn back around again and go, well, wait a minute, what's out there? What's coming? And if you start thinking about what's out there, what's coming, you also have to start thinking about, well, I'm 37 now. How many years do I have left on the clock, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why it's so uncomfortable. So I think humans have an inbuilt propensity to look backwards, because looking forward means, crap. Now I have to think about my own mortality again. And so I think that's why I don't have like a strong. I don't have a moral judgment of this. I don't think that if a person chooses to live in their little artificial bubble, only playing the games that they like, uh, you know, I understand. Okay, you you looked ahead and you went nope, and you look back and you went okay. I'm just gonna. I think it's a bit sad and a bit myopic, but I can understand why that would happen to a person, and to the point also that if a person doesn't manage to sort of balance these out perfectly, um, that's life. That's some people do better in this than others, but I would kind of, and also this is important. I don't think that I would expect anyone to sort of run towards the cliff.
Yeah, like pick up their speed.
You see like this book that looks really cool, and you're like, but whatever. There's going to be a new book next week. Boom, and then you just like you meet this nice girl, and you're like, but we're going to break up in 2 years anyway, so we'll just break up now. Bye. You got. Like it's just these people are going to be dead in 20 years anyway, so why even bother? Bye, right? Like you can't live your life like that either. That would be like caricaturishly stupid.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
really funny that you bring up, like, a little bit ago, you kind of talked about like, oh, I might get hit by a car and not have a chance to play this thing I'm looking forward to. I felt like I did that all the time, like as a teenager or whatever. Like, it's like, oh man, it would suck so bad if I were to die before Twilight Princess comes out or something like that, right? I was like super, super, super looking forward to that, or whatever game I was like really excited about. I literally would have this thought like all the time. And I have not had that in quite a long time. I want to say probably at least 5 or 6 or maybe even longer, maybe a whole decade. that I have gone without having the thought like, oh man, it would really suck if I died before this came out. And I wonder if it's partly two things. One, I have tried to do this wrestling with my own mortality. I've talked a lot about this on the podcast, and specifically tying to some of my favorite experiences of the last decade that I've had, games like Outer Wilds and maybe Hyper Light Drifter and a couple of others that are sort of like tied to that idea of recognizing your mortality, becoming at peace with it. So there's a part of me that hopes like that's the reason, but there's another part of me that thinks that like there is a boomer mindset sort of like setting in, where it's like I'm not excited for anything new because I don't think anything new is any good anymore.
Yeah.
But I wonder maybe how you feel about that, because I think, and I've been accused of this a lot in sort of my discussions online. Oh, you just don't like new stuff anymore, right? Which isn't true. I many of my favorite games in the video we did on our favorite games are games that came out in the last few years or whatever. My very favorite game is Outer Wilds. But how excited do you get at this point in your life for like new stuff? How often do you find that sort of like anticipation or hype for new stuff?
This is hard for me because I didn't really get hyped for things as a kid. I was way more cynical. I was way more cynical as a child than I am as an adult. Like, again, I am really, really excited to play Fantasia again. Actually.
Yeah.
I played it twice to completion, and I'm like, I'm still going to buy this on the Switch. Because,
that's what, like December 4th or something like that?
Yeah, or 5th. I think it's the 5th. And I'm sitting here like, wait, like what time is it? Hurry up already! Release the goddamn game already! I've had I think a different sort of evolution as a person than a lot of people. I used to be very sort of emotionally flatlined for most of my life. I didn't become sort of I don't think I became emotional as a person until sort of my ex-wife knocked it into me, because she kept complaining about the fact that I was so apathetic about things, right? Because we would go out to eat or whatever, or she would make food and she would ask, like, does it taste good? And I'd be like, yeah, sure, it tastes good, whatever. Because at that time in my life, and I would just eat to fill my stomach. I literally wouldn't be concerned about what the food tastes like at all. I just didn't care. I just ate to feel full. That is the only reason
dispelling the hunger pains, and that's literally it.
Yeah, I didn't eat because it tasted good. Like, who cares about that? That's irrelevant. And I would look at things like, you could look at a sunset or something. I wouldn't feel or think anything. It's just a sunset. Who cares? It wasn't really until I think a lot of people around me, including my ex-wife, sort of noticed that and picked up on that and said, like, that's really weird. Why are you sort of completely apathetic to everything, basically? I kind of, obviously I had a son too, right? So, I had to sort of examine the way that I was living, and I decided to tap a little, this doesn't sound good, but I decided to tap a little bit into hedonism, sort of really try to be there in the present moment and enjoy the food that I'm eating, and really sort of enjoy the moments. And at first it was a kind of pretend, but as I kept pretending, it became real eventually.
Fake it till you make it. That's like the whole concept. It worked.
Yeah, but I think that's actually true. I think that it's possible to be emotionally and sort of intellectually deadened, in a sense, and you have to artificially resuscitate it for it to bloom again. And I think it happens at first. It feels silly and kind of forced. Why am I why am I affecting sort of on purpose? But as you do it, it becomes real, and it's something. This is very Japanese, I think, because Japanese culture is a bit like that. They kind of foist the expectation of affectation onto people until it becomes real. So it's, if you watch sort of Japanese cooking shows and stuff like that, they will eat and everybody will go oishi, or the guy will go umae, like scream into the camera, right? Umae! And it's so affected. But the thing is that I've been with, so that's TV, and you think, oh, that's just TV. But the problem is that that isn't just TV. That's how, like, when I am out with my Japanese friends and we go out drinking and eating, that that's the person they become when they're eating and drinking. And I've become like that too. If you know, I'm out at a Japanese izakaya, right? I've been at work. I'm very tired, and you get that Sapporo beer in the large mug after work, and you take that first swig of that beer. It's it's the best thing in the world in that second if you get into that mindset, and it's whether you want to call it placebo or whatever, that just a taste exploding in your mouth, and you're just like, oh, this is so freaking good.
Yeah.
And I think that as you do that, as you become that character, it becomes true in a sense. Like it, you. That's the thing about emotions, right? I think it's kind of like working out, I guess, with your muscles or with your brain, for that matter. It's you have to use those parts of you to sort of and make them into something substantive. Where if you just leave them alone, they just wither and die. So if you don't use your emotions, I think you become emotionally dulled.
That adds a whole other element to this conversation that I wasn't even really anticipating, but now that I think about it, is really, really important too. Because when I was young, I was like an incredibly emotionally expressive person, just like almost outrageously. I was performative in the way that I emoted as like a child and coming into like early adolescence. I had a couple of experiences that really were embarrassing to me and that really turned me into a very reserved, almost hermit type person. And I mean, I was always introverted, but this like almost I doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on it, and was very, very concerned about like observing first and not like putting myself out there into situations where I could maybe embarrass myself again, right? So I sort of switched from being this highly emotive person into being this extremely like melancholic or just like flatline, like you say, emotionally person from probably about the age of 14 or 15 all the way up until maybe, I don't know, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, where I've now begun to try to do what you're saying. And I feel like this was even a good reminder. Like I feel like I spend so much time looking forward a lot of times now. I'm looking, okay, like I need to go get this project done, or I need to work on this, or I have this goal, or this what I'm looking forward so much that I'm missing where I'm at. I'm not present. I'm not like enjoying what I'm doing in that moment, even if it's mundane, like there's a sense that as you're walking towards that cliff of not spending your time looking forward or backward, but just like,
Yeah,
but feeling the sensation of the stones beneath your feet and enjoying the view of the tree that you're passing right now. And
exactly.
being neither in the past or in the future, but being where you are. This is obviously a huge principle of meditation, and why meditation's so useful and why it's so important. But like, I remember, as far as like hype goes, like the night that The Two Towers was going to be released in theaters, I had waited that whole year since watching Fellowship of the Ring. I came home from school and I started doing a dance in my house, and my mother like happened to walk in as she saw me doing this, and she's like, she kind of laughed at me, not like in a way that was mocking, but just she she was happy to see me expressing an emotion again, like being happy, right? Um, and so like I used to get like really, 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 really hyped for things, but there's also an element there where you're setting yourself up to be disappointed by like,
Sure.
again, anticipating a feeling. I think this is a great example of the concept again. I think what I really wanted was to experience the experience I had watching The Fellowship of the Ring the first time at theaters. I wanted that to happen again. But this is
Yes.
a different movie. Even though it's part of the same trilogy and there's a lot of similarities, it wasn't the same. And so I came out of that experience disappointed. And so I think that played into it a little bit, into this idea of like, don't get so excited, kind of flatline your emotions, control yourself. But it's not so much that you need to do. Like, that's not the answer either. It's to neither like get so hyped and just like out of your mind excited with anticipation for something, nor is it to dull your emotions to the point where you don't feel anything. It's rather to be where you're at without necessarily the context of the past and without overlooking where you're at about anticipating the future. Be where you're at and enjoy where you're at. And like it's in those moments, I think, that you really find the beauty of life, and maybe this idea where you can find beauty in impermanence. It comes into play as well.
Because the present moment is impermanent, right?
Yes.
The present moment is gone now.
Yes.
Now. There is,
I dug up this tweet from Yasumi Matsuno, and I kind of want to share this because I thought it was funny. Because it felt like there was a clash of these concepts, like coming into play in real time. And it just was funny to me, right? Because you could see this response as being like dismissive in some way. I don't really feel like that's what he's doing, though, because you have like a fan here who they posted a picture of their new copy of Unicorn Overlord on PS5, right? And this guy says, I started today. It's a great game so far. Reminds me of your Ogre Battle games. I wish we could get those ported to modern platforms, but I'm happy to have this, right? And sort of like tweets at him or whatever. And the first thing he says is, you should discard memories of past games. Like, like you could look at that from the Western lens and be like, wow, like that's really brash and rude. But I think what he's trying to say is exactly this concept of mono no aware that is so inherent in their culture. They just understand that feeling, sure. Right? I'll read the rest of it, so not to leave it off just on that, but he says, you should discard memories of past games, then please play the new game with a fresh perspective. I don't think it's necessary to discuss past songs every time you listen to a Taylor Swift song. And he got a lot of kickback for this. I mean, there were a lot of people who were a little bit upset, right? People were like, this is a terrible point, right? Like this guy says here, it's a terrible point. It basically implies that you shouldn't compare different pieces. You shouldn't be inspired by older pieces. You shouldn't reminisce on older things to see how you got here. Old gives way to the new, but you don't just throw away the past. And so he responded to that to add more nuance to this. What I'm trying to argue is that it is disrespectful to the creators of new games to compare every single game with older games. I do not compare the new game with the game I created, just whether it's interesting, whether it matches the marketability, what kinds of people it targets, whether it's avant-garde, whether I get any inspiration from this game, etc. That's all I wanted, you to know. Thank you. And I think there's a real strong point in that that's kind of getting at what we're saying here. Right? You don't get, I don't think he's trying to say literally like throw away the past. I don't think that's his point. I think his point is live where you are now and stop allowing your tendency, the human tendency to look back to mar your current experiences because they're not living up to something that happened in the past.
Some of this is probably also just what I would like to call problems concerning Japanese to English sort of translation and idiosyncrasies, because he wrote that in English, I suppose, but in Japanese he could have said the exact same thing, but in a sort of polite way, and the politeness would be implied from the grammar. And you can't really do that in the same way in English. You have to start supplementing it with sort of these clarifications or additional phrases. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if he just kind of wrote that in English, thinking that, that's the problem, right? But when English people see very stark, sort of short sentences in English, it feels very brusque, very kind of in your face, in a way that probably Japanese people are less sensitive to as they're typing in English, because Japanese is so different. But also more to the point, I think that what he as a Japanese creator might be feeling when he sees that is that it's a bit peculiar in the context of just having purchased the Unicorn Overlord, this new game, right? It would be one thing if the game has been out for now it's been out for a while, and somebody makes sort of a review of it, and it's a sort of in-depth review, and they draw parallels to other games. That's one thing, but it's something else when the game's just released and you just picked up a new copy and you're like, "Wow, this is great, but I would really like Final Fantasy Tactics." Like, what? Like from a Japanese person's perspective, that's a bit rude because why are you just bought this new game? Why are you talking about Final Fantasy Tactics? That's like so weird. You just bought this new game. We're talking about Unicorn Overlord, right? And
Right.
focus on that. It seems a bit strange that you're out there. Here's Unicorn Overlord, but anyways, back to Final Fantasy Tactics. Like,
Right. There's almost a sense like of just dismissal, like right off the bat. It's like you're walking into this wishing it was something else, but like this is the closest approximation I have, so I guess I'll take it. Maybe that's
yeah. I think that's something that because again, like Japanese is high context language. They use a lot of there's implications and everything sort of, and they look for those and they're sensitive to those. So I do a lot of I'm on Japanese social media, right? Not like Western social media, and so and one of the platforms that I use quite frequently have these sort of it's a bit like Discord where a lot of people gather and talk about things and. Japanese chat rooms, when it's one thing if everybody knows each other, but when you have a lot of different Japanese people that don't know each other in the chat room, and this is not like a stab at the Japanese people or anything like that. But it's I think most Japanese people will agree it's a pain in the ass because there's this concept in Japanese known as kukiyoyomu, which means to read the air, which is ky, which means kukiyomenai. Person who cannot read the air, and it's used quite frequently. But the problem with this is that just like everywhere else in the world, with every human, every group of human beings, there's no such thing as one air, right? That everybody agrees about and that encapsulates everybody. Because like one group of friends have their type of air, their types of sort of presuppositions and assumptions about life and communication, and then you have sort of your I guess nationality broadly speaking, but even that isn't that simple. Like I would say that in America, probably African Americans in New York have their own air, and then you have Indians over there, and you have some Vietnamese, and you have some white American liberals, and you have white Americans in the Rust Belt. And they all have their different airs, and this is true in Japan too. But for some weird reason, Japanese people have kind of bought their own idea that there is one air. And what this produces, of course, is a complete clusterfuck when it comes to communication, because you'll have 6 people who don't really know each other in a chat room together, and they all assume that their air is like the correct air, and they're all trying to. And on one hand, they're all trying to be polite and not kind of offend or step in the salad or whatever. But at the same time, it's impossible because they will, one of them will think that something has been implied by the other person, and then they get a bit surly about it, and then somebody else gets surly about that again, and so the entire thing just falls apart. And it's especially bad if they've had like a couple of drinks and stuff like that. So,
oh man, well, hold on a second. This is fascinating to me because, like you're saying, and again, this is coming from someone who knows almost zero Japanese, so this is why I'm kind of wanting the clarification. It's a high context language, which means you are expected to read between the lines. And that's exactly what I discourage in my own discourse with people. It's like, stop trying to read between the lines of what I'm saying. Just literally look at what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to say. Stop thinking I'm trying to apply something else. I'm not. I'm just telling you exactly what, I get so frustrated by that when I see people trying to interpret what I mean rather than just like take what I'm saying and have the faith that I can articulate it the way that I want you to take it. So I feel like I would get really frustrated by that. Like I don't I don't want you to try to figure out what I'm trying to say. I want to become efficient enough in communication to articulate exactly what I'm trying to say so that there's no confusion. But that's just not how Japanese works. So
Exactly.
that sounds awful to
Because
me.
social harmony is so important. And so, just as an example, in the West, we are, I think, very often, and I say West, I don't like doing that because it implies that the West is like a monolith,
Yeah,
and I
it's
don't
not all
think
the
that it
same.
is.
Yeah.
But in a lot of Western societies, at least, we're very encouraged to basically just put out our opinions out there as they are. I like this thing, I don't like this thing, and this doesn't really work very well in Japan, especially unless you're very close to somebody in a close knit friends group or whatever. Because when you say something like "I think Final Fantasy VII sucks," right? If there's anyone in that group that likes Final Fantasy VII, it's understood that that's kind of like hurtful to those. Like they don't have any interest in listening to you to tell them that their favorite game sucks. And so the expectation is that you should not say that. If you're a Japanese person in a group of people you don't know, you shouldn't say stuff like that. You shouldn't actually express your opinion like that, because you should understand that precisely because you don't know those people, blurting out your opinion in that manner is something that is going to hurt people, and it destroys the social harmony of the group. So even if you do dislike whatever game or movie or whatever, in a group with strangers, you're not supposed to be like blurting that out for no reason, without thinking about the consequences of that. But the problem again is that people can have, on the more granular level of communication, people can have different ideas of what type of words are harmful or imply, one thing as opposed to another. And so a Japanese person might say something that they think is, this is completely kosher. If I say this, nobody will get hurt by that. But then there is this one person in the room, and they are thinking that, like, oh my God, KY, right? Why are you saying those things? And then they go like behind the back to talk to another person to vent their frustration about this. It's a mess. So Japanese social media can be a real like cesspool sometimes, like super frustrating.
Yeah.
That's so in a sense here, I can also see. I don't think, obviously, I don't think Matsuno was implying anyways that we should just never make comparisons between things. But I also think that his reaction is very Japanese. It's very, okay, this guy just, what, like, this is weird. Sort of, this is socially speaking kind of not very, it's not socially savvy. What are you doing?
He was maybe concerned that this original poster was not reading the air very well with a post like that, wishing for
exactly.
a remaster of Ogre Battle instead of enjoying Unicorn Overlord.
Yeah, instead of joining Unicorn Overlord, right, and just like being focused on that so close to release and on social media and whatever, and also just like tagging him about like this game, these games that presumably he doesn't even have creative control over, anyways, and who knows what he thinks and feels about that as well, in terms of that's its own thing. So yeah. So it's a complicated issue. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. That's really fascinating. I just, to kind of tie a bow on this a little bit, at least as far as maybe where I feel like I've come to in terms of like understanding the concept of mono no aware. And particularly, I think the piece that fit it together for me was this idea of like being in the present, right? That the experience, let's say we're using the analogy of the cherry blossom, the experience of returning to watch them wilt and fall. I mean, there's a great scene actually that is almost this exact concept in The Last Samurai, where the Tom Cruise character is talking to Ken Watanabe, and he's talking about the cherry blossoms, right? It's a great scene. That I think probably also very much embodies this concept. But that there is a beauty in being present as this impermanence is occurring, right? And sort of appreciating that, because there is meaning to be taken in life from the fact that things are impermanent. There's a certain appreciation and adoration and love for something because you know it's not going to be there forever, and that this exercise in going there and watching this is sort of a symbol for that feeling of, there's melancholy, of course, in there. There's sadness for losing something, but in the same act, there's also this appreciation for what it gave you and for how it changed you and for how it caused you to grow. And without that experience of impermanence, without watching that thing come and go, right, it's not the same. You can take things for granted that you don't lose, right? And so it almost stands, this act of going and watching that, as like an exercise, almost like in rapid time. You're like watching it all happen at once, kind of, in a sense. And maybe not everybody's consciously doing this. Maybe they're just going to look at the beautiful flowers. But I feel like there's this underlying sense there of a really important lesson, that you live in the present and you try to focus on where you're at and not spend so much of your energy and time in places that either don't exist anymore or don't exist yet, but be where you are and where it actually is real. And in that act, gain your appreciation for what your life has given you in the past, but allow it to pass and open yourself up for the good things that are coming, rather than missing them because you're too busy looking backwards.